The story of our conflicting relation with US is long, but I'm going to mention only some elements that give only hints to all of you necessary to understand what is behind. The story began from far before the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. Dear friends, the national subordination of the island of Cuba was always a strong interest of US policy from the period we were still a colony of Spain. In that pitiful era of colonialism that isn't still finished, they even tried to buy our country from Spain, but failed in the intent. That is the reason that when our war against Spain was almost won by our fighters for independence in the 19th century, after tens of years of bloodshed and sacrifice, US Army suddenly intervened in our war, and from then on we became a neo-colony of this powerful neighboring expansionist country. The same happened to Philippines, that is also here with us. But the admiration of US politicians for our people was then really very low. For instance, in December 24, 1897, US Undersecretary of War, Mr. Breckinridge, wrote in a memorandum, and I quote, "The Cuban population is made up of whites, blacks, Asians, and people who are a mixture of these races. The inhabitants are generally indolent and apathetic, since they only possess a vague notion of what is right and wrong. The people tend to seek pleasure not through work but through violence. It is obvious that the immediate annexation of these disturbing elements into our federation in such large number would be madness. We must destroy everything within our cannon's range of fire. We must impose a harsh blockade so that hunger and its constant companion, disease, undermine the peaceful population and decimate the Cuban army. The US Army must be constantly engaged in reconnaissance and vanguard actions so that the Cuban army is irreparably caught between two fronts." End of quote. That's the opinion of the American regarding Cuba in the 19th century. In this neo-colonial period, after the false declaration of independence, Cuba was transformed in a playground of US Marines, mafia, and entrepreneurs. Humiliation, gambling, drugs, illiteracy, poverty, violence, rum, beaches, beautiful women was then the image, the brand of Cuba internationally. With the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, all this situation changed, and we became a dignified country, recognized for our dedication to social justice, human solidarity, and devotion for independence. We became by far the country with the biggest program of cooperation in the whole world. Around 50,000 doctors and health workers in the world working every year. And we have a few of them in the Pacific, in Timor-Leste. We have for many years. I had the opportunity to introduce the cooperation with Timor-Leste. But we have also in Timor-Leste around, I feel next year or the next, we will have around 1,000 doctors in Timor-Leste, the highest index of doctors to inhabitants in all Asia. And we have around 119 students from the Pacific Island in Cuba studying medicine with scholarship from Cuba, and several doctors also. With the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, this image and behavior was never accepted by US policy that feared the possible influence of our example in Latin America and wanted to bring everything back and regain the control of our destiny. This was and is the aim of the blockade. Let me tell you that the thesis of US government behind the blockade discovered the same sympathy of US policy that US policy had toward Cuban population at the end of the 19th century, and I just quoted before. The following ideas were literally stated in a meeting chaired by President Eisenhower in 1960, and I quote, "There is no effective political opposition in Cuba, so the only predictable way that we have today to alienate internal support for the revolution is through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship. Any means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba, including denying money and supplies to Cuba, and to decrease monetary and real wages, with the end of bringing about hunger, desperation, and as a consequence, the overthrow of the government. End of the quote. That is the explanation of the more than half a century blockade, the invasion of Bay of Pigs, the constant terrorist incursions into our country, organized and financed in the US, the permanent intention to kill our leaders, and the sabotage of a Cuban civil airplane where 73 civil passengers were murdered. That is to say, the purpose has been to punish our people for more than half a century in order to oblige us to overthrow the revolutionary government. They failed. The constant promotion of the arguments that we don't respect democracy and human rights are simply false supporting points of the criminal policy of the blockade. Our people and workers are one of the most protected in the whole world and enjoy tangible human rights. They are not satisfied by empty words that mean nothing or almost nothing to the real and daily life of any human being, as happened with the common demagogical declarations and promises made by most Western democracies that should be named instead monocracies. But the obsessive and persistent anti-Cuban policies of the US led the revolution to form a robust, united front and create defensive mechanisms of many kinds. We strengthened our popular militia and army and developed a sophisticated intelligence system based on a solid ethic and the commitment of our agents that are not mercenaries but cultured and honorable men and women loyal to ideals. As you know, we defeated the invasion of Bay of Pigs and many mercenary groups that broke into our country with the help of CIA, and we are still here, resilient after more than half a century of cruel and comprehensive blockade. One of the materialization of this self-protective Cuban policy was the infiltration of Cuban agents within terrorist group in Miami, where they concentrate, in order to alert our government beforehand on their aggressive plans and actions. The Cuban Five, condemned unjustly with excessively long sentences, were doing this risky and delicate, although very important work, not against US government and people, but against those terrorist activities organized in US soil. That is to say, they detected terrorist acts and alerted in advance the Cuban government in order to avoid more human and material damages to our country. We have to add that the Cuban Five have a very specific history that demonstrates how biased and unjust could be US policy against Cuba. And I will list some illustrative facts briefly. First, we alerted US government and FBI of those dangerous operations of terrorist groups in Miami that included the manipulation and storage of different dangerous explosive substances, thanks to the information we gathered from the 5 Cubans. However, with the information we supplied, so surprisingly, FBI, instead of stopping those terrorist activities, used it to trail and trap our agents. Second, despite legal opposition, US government organized the trial just in Miami, where extreme rightist groups have strong political and economic leverage that permit them to influence the government, the jury, and the press. In particular, recently have been confirmed that several members of the American press have been paid millions of US dollars to help create a public negative atmosphere during the trial against the Cuban Five. Third, these attitudes explain why the arguments used in the trial by the prosecutors were manipulated and used even when they couldn't be supported by facts, or more than that, when there were and are evidences that demonstrate their innocence. Fourth, the sentences were streamed from 15 years to two life sentences plus 15 years, even when normally in US for espionage, not conspiracy to commit espionage, as is the case they raised, the sentence are between 4 to 6 years or deportation. Fifth, during this period, the 5 Cubans have been treated with cruelty, frequently sent to the so-called hold, and with strong difficulties or without access at all to see their families. And sixth, as it is known, the mainstream press in the US has been keeping silence around the case of the 5 as a way to isolate them from public opinion. We have to say that there have been wall opposition to the abuses of the US against Cuba and against these loyal Cubans, and I will mention some facts. For more than 20 times, the United Nations General Assembly has voted massively in favor of the resolution against the blockade, among them Australia. Almost in every country, including the US and Australia, there are associations of friendship with Cuba and committees that claim that the blockade must end and the Cuban 5 must be freed. The working group on arbitrary detention of the United Nations Human Rights Commission declared that the trial against the 5 was not impartial and the sentences excessively severe. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeal in Atlanta ruled unanimous that the trial was biased due to community prejudice and extensive media coverage. The National Lawyers Guild of America declared that politics influenced the US court decision, and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights demonstrated also its concern. But dear friends, as it happens with the blockade, despite universal opposition, the pitiful situation of the 5 in US prisons is still the same. Many things more could be said that demonstrate how unjust and manipulated has been US policy toward Cuba, and in the case of the trial of the 5. But this is not the occasion to mention them exhaustively. Dear members of the Maritime Union of Australia, dear visitants, since we know we can count on you as always, we took the advantage of the chance you give me today to insist in aspects in which we know we have your full support. Thanks again for your solidarity.